I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and no, it isn't Groundhog Day, but we are back reviewing the Mazda CX-60 for the third time in 3 years. Why? Because unusually, it's taken 3 attempts to get this vehicle right, according to Mazda. There are 2 big takeaways that you're going to get from this video. One, there's been another revision of the suspension and the transmission on the CX-60. There was already a revision in April 2024, but this time around, the changes to the suspension are more significant. Does the CX-60 now ride properly? I'll reveal the answer to that in today's video. Second big takeaway, Mazda Premium as a strategy is effectively dead. When this vehicle launched in Australia, Mazda attempted to sell it at significantly higher prices than what is in place today, and the price has just been slashed massively on the CX-60, particularly the hybrid, but also the 6-cylinder engines, and a cheap 4-cylinder petrol is coming that will start in the 40s. For a car that was initially pitched as a BMW X3 rival, the CX-60 is now far more affordable. Is that more appropriate? Is value for money better? You'll get all the answers from this independent Chasing Cars review. But before we get started, hit subscribe down below.
Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car.
Brought to you by Budget Direct. We only need to briefly remind ourselves of the interior of the CX-60 because if you're a subscriber, you'll already have seen my long-term review of this car on its original suspension, and everything in here has remained the same. But while we're in here, I did want to mention 2 sweet spots in the range that you should consider, and they are the Touring and the GT grades. I no longer think you need a top spec Azami, while you should also be careful because the base model Pure has things like completely hard door skins, which are not very appealing. Touring is on smaller 18-inch wheels, which deliver slightly better ride quality, still has a good amount of equipment. That's late 50s before on-road costs now with the 6-cylinder engines. This GT is where the CX-60 really starts to feel plush. I'm in the diesel, which is mid-60s before on-road costs, about 70 grand drive away, and you are getting a lot of car for your money. There's plenty of space in here, but also nice finishings. Leather on the seats, I've got the optional Rivera stone, which looks really great, but also pebbled leather-like material up here on the dash, a heated leather steering wheel, you got heated seats front and rear, GT gets a panoramic sunroof, better headlights, and Bose premium audio. All things that you'll probably want if you're buying this as a family car that you're going to keep for a while. And at the new price of about $70 on road for the GT 6-cylinder diesel, you really need to compare that to sort of the cost of like a BMW X3 6-cylinder diesel, which is about $110 before on-road costs. Even a Volkswagen Touareg diesel, you're in the 90s. Mazda have dramatically reduced the cost of this car, and even though as we see when we'll drive it, it remains a little rough around the edges in parts, it's pretty nice for what you're now spending on it. Comfortable seats, good ergonomics, lots of hard buttons for the infotainment and the climate, good sounding stereo, build quality is exceptional in here. Storage is a bit on the light side, big car with not a huge amount of spaces to put things, but it's ultimately livable. Let's check out the back seat. In fact, the CX-60 is now not that much more expensive than a CX-5, and here in the back seat is where you get the benefit of the 60, because the CX-5 is really tight in row 2. The 60's got okay legroom, good toe room, and good headroom. For 6-footers, I'm 183 centimeters. You can disconnect this seat belt and then use the flip down armrest here with 2 cup holders. You've got air vents, USB-C, heated second row, and also a household power point, which is a nice and rare feature here in the back, while soft touch materials actually continue into row 2, and there are some vestigial parts in the CX-60 that remind you that it was designed as a luxury car, like the fact that there are nice little black covers over where the body color would normally shine through. Now that's an incredibly niche point, but it is one of those things that you see in premium vehicles rather than mainstream, where exposed body panels are usually visible from inside. There's a bit of trivia that you might not have known about. Moving around the back now, zircon sand won't be a color for everyone, and nor are the proportions of the CX-60 as attractive of those of the wide-body CX-70 and CX-90, but it's not an unattractive car. You can let me know what you think down below. Going for the GT, you keep the power tailgate on the lower grades, but it does have a kick to open feature, 477 litres of space, bit of netting, remote releases for the rear seats, Beneath the floor, you've got a space saver spare. That's better than the nothing you get in a number of rival cars these days. Drop that boot, which means it's time for us to take a drive. So we now need to drive the CX-60 and discuss whether this second round of suspension and transmission changes have improved things further. A complete fix, a complete change in character in just one generation is unlikely to have occurred, and it hasn't. The CX-60 is still not perfect. It's still a bit rough around the edges, but I'm going to say the 2025 changes are probably about 20% better than the 2024 change, which was itself about 30% better than the launch. So incrementally, Mazda has improved the ride quality of this car, and it's now to quite a noticeable level. If you put a launch car back to back with this car, you will see the changes. And in fact, I've done some back-to-back testing today here at Lang Lang, Holden's famous proving ground, where generations of Commodores were tuned and ended up driving pretty well. It's quite an honest place to test, but I've also driven the updated CX-60 on highways and suburban roads in Melbourne to get a proper holistic idea. So what has Mazda done this time around? Well, the dampers have actually remained the same. It's the damping force and the spring rates that have been changed, and also some hardware. A couple of knuckles have been repositioned slightly. And at the back, a major revision is the removal of the anti-roll bar, and that's easily visible, and I'll chuck some footage on screen now. That's gone. It was already pulled out of the CX-80, so Mazda's sacrificing a little bit of stability in the corners and introducing a bit more roll, but also giving a little bit more compliance at the rear end. So have those changes made the CX-60 ride better? Well, yes, they have. I actually think probably the biggest change came from last year, where a lot of the lurching vertical body control at the rear end was improved. This round of changes is actually more about slightly softening the CX-60's bump response rather than taking away the big violent jerking, which was more solved 12 months ago. So the front suspension, which has been relaxed off a little bit, I would say, no longer feels so sharp and overdamped. Instead, when it strikes a bump, there's a little bit more compliance there. In the corners, you're noticing more body roll because that anti-roll bar is gone, so it's a little bit less stiff as we dodge some kangaroos now that we're getting towards dusk. So I would say it feels a little bit more roly-poly, which is fine for a family SUV, to be honest. It's a little more cushy, it's a little more soft, but there is still an underlying firmness to the ride of the CX-60, and longtime Mazda drivers will like that, because Mazdas typically are quite sporty and are quite athletic. This doesn't suddenly feel like a Toyota Kluger or something, a vehicle which is probably over soft and a bit boaty. You definitely wouldn't accuse the CX-60 of being boaty even after this last round of changes. There is still a firmness there, but it's less crashy than it was in 2024, which in turn was less crashy than 2023. Where the rough edges remain is in a few of those more difficult areas to seize on, and that is suspension noise. You do hear quite a bit, particularly when you're sitting in the back, the noise of the suspension working away. And also there is still the occasional moment where the front suspension will crash through the bump as it runs out of compliance, even on the 18-inch wheels, although it's more pronounced on the 20s that you get on this GT and the Izami. But all in all, there's about a 50% total improvement in the ride of this car from when it originally launched, and that is a big change. The transmission too is a little smoother again. Amazingly, smoothness was not a KPI when the CX-60's transmission was first developed. That's now firmly a KPI and is measured by Mazda's engineers. Most of the time, you no longer notice the CX-60's transmission, which is exactly what you want. It's a novel in-house Mazda design with a multi-clutch system. It's not a dual clutch. It doesn't have a torque converter. Why Mazda didn't just choose an off-the-shelf ZF Auto or similar doesn't really compute with me, but this design has been improved in terms of its shift smoothness, but you do occasionally still sense it clunking into first gear as you're slowing down. So that's another element where still a little bit of that roughness around the edges. Thankfully though, Mazda hasn't messed with two of the things that the CX-60 really got right, which is the engines and the steering. To start with the engines, there continue to be two standouts. The one I'm driving now is the real sweet spot, the 3.3 litre straight six diesel that makes 187 kilowatts of power and 550 newton meters of torque. It's refined, it's muscular, and its real-world fuel economy in the sixes, really no matter how you drive it, that's kind of where it settles long-term, is excellent. The petrol is a bit more powerful, a bit less torquey, still a 3.3 litre six, but it drinks a lot more fuel. So given there's only a $2,000 difference between them, the diesel will pay for itself quickly, and it's what I recommend. The plug-in hybrid with a 4-cylinder petrol continues, although without the benefit of the fringe benefits tax waiver, which is now expired in Australia. It's no longer a particularly appealing choice. It's the least refined of the options, it's the least good match to the 8-speed automatic in this car, and it's the heaviest, with a lot of that weight where you wouldn't really want it down the back, which impacts the handling. So I would avoid the plug-in hybrid, while the forthcoming non-hybrid 4-cylinder, which will probably also be non-turbo, will be cheap, but certainly not fast. But that engine is for people that probably don't really care so much about the powertrain under the bonnet, and they just want the size of the CX-60. The steering too is cultured and really excellent for a vehicle of this size. It sort of feels like it's been taken from the MX-5. It's a little heavy compared to some other SUVs, but feelsome. You can't change the mode. There's one ratio in it, and it really just tells you what's going on the road really nicely. Not only is the ride quality a lot better than when this car launched, if not perfect, the price has also come down while it still packs desirable 6-cylinder engines, sporty and good steering, and also a clear rear-wheel drive bias in the way the car gets down the road. As an affordable alternative to something like a BMW SUV, the CX-60 could be a really interesting option if you like driving. And the fact that the ride is no longer crashy means there's not a simple reason to rule the CX-60 out. It should now be on your test drive list as far as I'm concerned, because it's more suitable for more Australians than ever before. So what's my final verdict on the 2025 iteration of the Mazda CX-60? Well, it's another incremental upgrade. Last year, when the first changes came through for this car, I called them about a 30 to 40% improvement on the launch iteration of the CX-60. Well, this is probably another 20% improvement. We're not talking about night and day changes to this car, and certainly there remain elements of the dynamics which continue to be a bit rough around the edges. A little bit too much suspension noise, that transmission still isn't perfect, but certainly the big problems like the crashy front suspension and the wayward rear suspension have been considerably improved, even if the ride is not perfect on this car. Does it have to be perfect? Well, it's also hard to ignore that the CX-60 is now much cheaper than when it first launched. Mazda's no longer seeking luxury car money. It's not cheap by any stretch, but certainly you're getting a big car, you're getting a big 6-cylinder engine for what you might be paying for a smaller 4-cylinder vehicle from some rival manufacturers. So the CX-60 could be an interesting option if you do like bigger stuff, bigger SUVs, bigger engines. Not many rivals will give you a 6 in this day and age. So maybe there is an additional market there. Keen to know your opinion. Let me know down below this video in the comments. While you're there, hit subscribe and the notification bell. And as always, thank you for watching Chasing Cars.